Mm.
Good morning. It is, I can't even believe it. It's May 17th. Had to look at the date. And we are discussing the story Electricity. And Alice and I have talked, but like I started reading it and I was like, well, this seems familiar. And then it took me a hot minute because, you have to Google it and blah, blah, blah. But we read it when we read The Jewish Women.
Right.
It was to,
You had told me that the other night. I kept waiting for it to sound familiar and it didn't. So I don't think I ever read it.
Oh my God.
listen, I figured it's been 2 years. This group could review. I've got a few new people. Maybe some of you weren't here for that. Alice and I were like, didn't we read? Like, we weren't sure. We weren't exactly sure that we had. We just thought we had.
The only part that sounded familiar to me was the Milt Perlman part where he talks about the father that's so fabulous. And I thought, I've read this before somewhere.
Yeah.
And that was it.
I wasn't in this group then, so I didn't read it. So I decided I better read it twice.
Susan. All right. Well, as always, I like to take a quick look at, the author and what she looks like. And even when I looked at her picture, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Francine. I've seen her before. I think some of these are older pictures. So I'm pretty sure she's like 75.
I think she's 76. I think she's
76. Okay, 76. She did write the book, The Vixen, which I still haven't read. And I remember saying it 2 years ago, maybe we should look into that, but I still haven't. And let me read you a little bit about her. She was born in 47. She's an American novelist, short story writer, essayist, and critic. She is a visiting professor of literature at Bard College, which is a very Jewish college, and was formerly president of Penn American Center, which I don't know what that is. She was born in Brooklyn. She graduated from Radcliffe. When you say Radcliffe and somebody, in 68, it makes me think of Love Story. Am I right? She went to Radcliffe, right?
Yeah.
Her novel, The Glorious Ones, has been adapted into a musical. And in 2007, she was chosen to succeed American writer Ron Chernow, beginning in April, to serve a one-year president of this Penn American Center. And there's a controversy. I don't know. No. Anyway, I think I don't want to say she's got the typical Jewish background, but typical Jewish background. Sorry. Did you like the story? Let's start there.
No.
Judy, go ahead.
Well, I like the story, but for a very strange reason. I had a girlfriend that was pregnant when I was pregnant with my first child. We lived in the same building. We gave birth within a few days of each other. Her husband was a dentist. They had 2 children. This was the third. And he changed his mind and decided to become Orthodox.
Wow.
And so it was this story, but it was in my generation happening to a friend of mine. They ended up getting a divorce. He moved back to where he had lived as a young man or child. And it was he found a community where it could be closed in. And listening to her stories was horrifying. When you marry someone, you expect it to be a certain way, and it isn't that way. What do you do? And when you have children, he took over the children. It was really horrible. So for me reading this, I think it was very emotional. I was very emotional. And I would love to know an answer to what everybody thinks about the last paragraph. I didn't understand where we should go with that.
I agree.
We'll get there. What did other people think of the story?
I read it more than once. I actually found it online, which was very helpful because the whole story is online. Commentary magazine, I guess, reprinted it.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
so it was helpful because this is kind of a bulky book and I need a lot of light when I'm reading a regular book. I'm so used to reading Kindle on my iPad, but as many times as I reread it, I shouldn't say I didn't like it. I didn't quite feel like I could wrap my arms around what exactly was going on. I mean, there were definitely moments that were interesting, but I just found it very, confusing and kind of hard to access where she was going. So that's kind of how I ended up.
I have Beverly, Lynn, Sue, Ellen, Alice. Oh God, I gotta write that down.
Yeah.
Beverly.
Well, I really like the story. And I think because I have an Orthodox daughter and an Orthodox niece, I have been involved as an outsider looking in to the Orthodox community for over 30 years. And I mean, I could be Orthodox because I know all the stuff. That doesn't mean I'm going to be, but I could be. So when I read stories like this, I feel involved. I feel like I understand what's going on. Doesn't mean I like it or I approve of it or any of those things, but I did like the story. And I want to just say that I have enjoyed all of the stories that I've read, and I really have liked being part of this group. You're very smart, all of you.
Thank you, Bev.
Yeah.
Good to start off the morning with that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to unmute you, Susan Wellick. Go ahead.
Well, I kind of agree with what Terry said. That's why I needed to read it twice, because the first time I read it, I was so confused. I thought, where is this going? And the end just left me hanging. I thought, so what happened? And then I had to read it again. And when I read it again, it did make more sense, but I still don't get the ending. So I can't wait till we get there and people smarter than I am can tell me what it's about.
I think this takes a village. Ellen.
Well, I was happy to hear Terry's comments. I only had time to read it once. I kept going through it, looking for the familiarity, which there was none. So I can only hope that it's not that I forgot it totally, but that I hadn't read it. Maybe I had missed class that day. It's confusing. I mean, it's two stories. It's her story and her separation from her husband and her baby. And then this Orthodox part with the father. And I mean, I'm curious. I'm actually curious, Judy, I'll talk to you offline, I guess, about whether your friend did he just change to Orthodox, or had he had a background of it?
He had just changed. Totally
I mean,
changed.
I've monitored with interest all my life. My grandmother was very Orthodox, and my dad grew up that way, but he had served in the war and had broken so many of the kashrut that when he came back, he decided to be conservative, thank God, because I don't think I would ever adopt Orthodoxy on my own. I would have been one of the rebels that left the family. But I've always been fascinated by especially the modern Orthodox movement, of those that come back to it. And I've always thought it was a need to belong, because it's a very, being in an Orthodox community is a very strong feeling of belonging, but that's not what this story is about. It's really the father's change to it and wanting to, make sure that his family's, to impart at least the reasons why, and to dominate his family, I guess. So I don't know. I'm confused by the ending too, so I will wait to learn more about it.
Lynn.
Okay, what I saw in this story, and it does lack coherence, but for a reason. It's theme and variation. It's sort of like a symphony. You are bringing threads together and then weaving them into a central theme. To me, the central theme is human nature's desire for predictability, and she says in this that predictability, that is the key to their life, predictability. Well, look at all the different strands in the story where people are changing. And if you look at, I took this quote from Einstein because it reminded, Gary wears a shirt with this quote on it. And his quote is, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change." And in the story, the Hasidism, to me, is not the central part. It's not the central part of the story. It is the dominant change in the story. But for those of you who reread it, and I did skim it, Anita says, "I just wish things would return to the way they were." And all through the story, they're saying this change. I can't stand this change. I wish we were back to really the status quo. And I think I mentioned this before. It might have been in the same discussion of this story. But some of my friends taught at Rochelle Zell, and they had a young woman there who taught there and then went off to do her thesis. And it was on why young people are turning to Orthodoxy. And the reason that people are turning, a lot of these young people, is that there are rules. And that word rules comes up in the entire story. What are these rules? And if you have rules, you don't change. You are bound by these rules. And so the father is the ultimate, the extreme in this symphony. And then you've got this, and there are other themes going on too, which I won't get into. What's the Jamie? What's the husband's name that leaves because
Jamie.
Okay.
Jamie.
Okay, so this is to me a part of this theme because the baby coming in is going to bring great change to his life. And he quotes this story about Milt Perlman's father. And we're wondering why this is in this, how all of a sudden this story comes up. Well, it's about legacy. It's about what do you want to leave your children? And ultimately, he doesn't see the point that it's more than materialism that you leave as a legacy to your kids. You leave stories, you leave experiences, you leave what's in your family. And I think that's that electricity is about connection of family members and what they give each other. And so I think there are lots of different elements to the story which make it confusing. I agree, it isn't coherent. And I think we like rules in a story. We like coherence and we want everything to connect. And it does, but not always directly. So that was my take of the story.
Very interesting. I have Izzy, Sandy, Terry, and then Judy.
No,
Alice. Okay. Raise your hand virtually. That helps me. Izzy, Alice, Sandy.
Okay, I had a very different take on it. And I had read it. And then I thought, gosh, I think I read this before, Earth Bernie or whatever it was. I thought that was, okay, I had a very different take on it. I thought it was propaganda for Orthodoxy. This is the way I thought about it. She came there very anxious, very insecure. Her father, for some unknown reason, totally changed. His poor wife, I felt so sorry for him, but he believed in every one of those rules, which changed her life, which I didn't think was fair. But then when Anita came, very insecure, very anxious, very upset, her life had all changed. She drank the grape juice. She drank the Kool-Aid, is what I thought.
Oh, I didn't get that, but
I really did, because at the beginning, she wasn't sure. She didn't know what she was going to do. After she goes to that service where all the people are Googling about her baby, she sees
Yeah.
all the warmth of all these people and she finds like a community. And all of a sudden she comes back from that and she feels so wonderful. Then she goes down to see her father with all the lights on when he was too cheap to put it all on. And she puts her hand out and it's like she's suddenly connected to him and this whole way of life. And in that minute, it seemed to me that she was become Orthodox.
Oh,
Follow
Interesting.
all the rules. That's what I thought, that was a whole change. The mother was going to be left out, driving miles to get his soap or whatever it is.
Right.
She at that moment, she felt wanted and part of a community that she didn't have before because her husband was gone. And all these ladies were so wonderful. They were dancing with the baby, whatever. She felt so good. She came downstairs and he put his hand out and that was it. She was connected to him and she was going to be Orthodox.
Interesting. Interesting.
For me, that was just very.
Yeah. Sandy, no, Alice. It's Alice, Sandy, Terry, and then Elaine. Alice, go. And then Judy.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of going to touch on what Lynn, Izzy, Judy, Ellen, what you all said, but I really thought that it was kind of parallel stories of, the husband, Jamie, changing dramatically and the father changing dramatically. But I don't think that that's necessarily that unusual. I think if we all think, well, first of all, I mean, Judy told the story of her friend, husband, turning Orthodox kind of, suddenly. Well, I have a good friend. She just had her second child with him and he up and left. I mean, that happens. That happens a lot. I've heard that more. This was just my very close friend, but I've heard that happening a lot. So I feel that, we're all, aren't we all just looking like, what does it all mean? And how can we find meaning in this life? And I think sometimes you have this internal discussion with yourself, and then all of a sudden something hits you and, oh, this is where I'm going to go. So sometimes it seems outwardly that it's sudden, but it might not be sudden. So that's one thing. In terms of Izzy, what you said, drinking the Kool-Aid, I don't know if I would put it that way because to me, that's a more negative connotation, but I agree with you. When she went to the wedding, with her father, she saw like a lot of positive things. She saw the community, how loving all these people, they didn't even really know her and they were so warm to her and to her child. And so I don't think she was necessarily going to turn Orthodox, but I just think she was understanding her father more of what he was out of that community. I don't think she was going to turn Orthodox. And yeah, so that's my take on it.
All right. Sandy.
I really enjoyed the story. I kind of don't respect a lot of the stuff that goes on in Orthodoxy because I have Orthodox relatives and they go so far nutty. Especially last week I was at the Lincoln congregation, Lincolnwood, and it's Shabbat. They invited us for the service and then they chain off the parking lot and it's pouring rain and we have to go park a block or two away and then walk through the rain there. I mean, some of the stuff they go through is just so ridiculous. But I grew up Orthodox. I grew up in an Orthodox shul. Could never go back to that. I'm a confirmed Reformed Jew. I really did like this story. I didn't understand the end. I think, like several of you have said, you can read it several different ways. But it is, she's really a good writer. I very much like the story.
Thank you. Thank you.
One other thing.
yeah.
I know that some years back, I don't know if it was my time or somewhere in between my daughter's times, I did see a lot of this where young couples got married, they had a baby, and the guys start fooling around with someone in their office, and a lot of divorces. But I don't think that's so now. I see my grandsons, they are such good fathers and such good husbands, and they don't think it's an imposition to be left with the babies and take them out and go to the playgrounds or take them to a baseball game.
Right, because Sandy, it's not being left with the babies. They're the other parent. It's not babysitting. That's their responsibility. And when you say left with the babies, you don't say that to the mom, left with the babies. So
But the fathers are really great fathers now. I just can't get over it. Really great fathers. You still see, you go out for brunch, especially on the weekend, you see the fathers alone with kids, and you figure it's probably a divorced couple and he's got the child for the weekend and taking him out for brunch. You can almost spot them in any of the.
Well, that's a different story. Okay, thank you. Terry.
Well, there's a few things. First of all, I thought it was very interesting when Anita's sister Lynn came for dinner, and her mother cooked the same company dinner she made when Anita first came home.
Yeah.
But without their father's blessing. The meat tasted greasy, the potatoes lukewarm, the gelatin had a rubbery skin. His absence should free them, thinks Anita, but he's all they talk about, and voice is so low he might as well be downstairs. I mean, that to me, the fact that she said the food didn't taste as good without their father's blessing, she obviously feels connected to her father in what he's doing, even though for her mother, it's explained her unhappiness isn't philosophical, it's practical. Because she's been forced to start keeping a kosher home at the age of 53, 2 sets of dishes. And the doctor says salting the meat is bad for the heart, and the smallest details of life now have rules that Sam won't let her break, which is what Lynn referred to. And it's kind of interesting to me that there's something going on here that she's trying to figure out. The thing that I found really I don't understand, what baby practices fake smiles? What was that about? And she talks about that all the time. The librarians were so into the baby that he fell asleep exhausting himself working on his smiles. And then he was doing the same thing at the wedding. And the fact that he can pick up his own Cheerios and he's a genius, and yet she doesn't want to tell her husband that, because what kind of a mother thinks that's special that he should pick up the Cheerios? So she's always kind of conflicted. When her sister mentions the fact about the baby holding his head up, she calls her on it. But when her husband mentions it, she doesn't. So she seems to relate to different people in her life in a different way. And when you think about what her background was, first of all, she and her husband were so stoned in the produce section that back in the day that they were like remarking on the vegetables. And when she dropped acid, she noticed that the radio kept playing songs that dealt with her life. So she's kind of a complicated individual. I was trying to piece all of this together. And also the one last thing is the name of the story, Electricity. Obviously there's something about light that is a thread that goes through the story he tells on the subway with the hooligans and the blinking light. And then the mother says one blinky light and that caused all this. And he goes, it wasn't the light, but he doesn't say what it was. And then the part about the fact that he used to tell them to turn off the lights, but now every light is on in the house. So what is that about? I'm just trying to figure it all out. I'm like throwing out the things that confuse me.
I got that. All right. I have Elaine, Judy, Alice, and then Merle.
Okay. I agree
Then Lynn.
with Lynn. The story, we're all fixated on the Orthodox. I think the main thrust of the story is the divorce and how she is trying to cope in her world. Think about it. You have a new baby, your husband leaves, you move home with your parents. Of course, the father is important to her. He's the only male figure. The husband is basically gone. And you don't know what to do, and you don't know how you're treated and how people are treating you. So you're mixed up, you treat everyone differently. And I think the smiles of the baby is a euphemism or whatever for her trying to cope with her world and her being different to different people. And I think we all are. We tell one person one thing, and because the other person wants to hear that, and that will make them happier, that we do that. I mean, we don't always act the same way for everyone. Come on, guys. You all know that. And I think it's more the story of life and how in our older age, which we all know, I think we are closer to God than we were when we were children, because we're closer to dying, okay? And we, I understand the father. Maybe the father went overboard, but I think we all feel that way, that when we die, we want someone to remember us and to take care of us. And I think she is floating in the world. I mean, she talks about maybe she should have kept her job. Maybe she really doesn't have a life outside of the baby and her parents. So I think that the Orthodoxy is just an overview. It's the divorce that is the major story.
Interesting. Okay. I have Alice, Meryl, Judy, Lynn, Susan.
Yeah, so I was just looking at, I think Judy at the beginning, or somebody said something about the last paragraph. And I almost think that you have to look at the last two paragraphs, because it's talking about all these connections. So she's having, she's in labor, having Birdie, and she's holding, Jamie's hand, and she's remembering how much that connection helped her. And then she says now she sees that Jamie didn't mean to hurt her. He was scared too. So I think there is that, she's realizing that, he was scared about being a father, about having all those responsibilities, yeah. And it goes to Terry. I think, Terry was talking about how, they were stoned and they were this, and, and I think it was like, they went from getting married, really quickly. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but, pretty quickly they're having this baby. So that's one thing. And then it's like, she, with the electricity between her and her father, I mean, she said she's not really touching him yet. Her father's hand is still a few inches away, but she feels that connection. And I think that she's starting to feel the connection because she's opening herself up to,
Right.
not to Orthodoxy, but what her father was going through, why he was looking to Orthodoxy for certain things. I don't think it's, and I think I agree with Elaine, I don't think it's so much about what it means to be Orthodox. I think it's more about what is a person getting out of that. And then finally, there's the, Birdie is nursing, and then all of a sudden he sits up watching them. So I think it's like this, Lador Vador, from generation to generation, and that, and that, I think, as many people said, she's so close to this baby, and, it's all consuming, but that she sees that he's a separate being and he's going to go his own way and he's going to find his way through life. And that's the theme for me, is everybody, we're all trying to find our way through this thing we call life.
Okay, I'm sorry, Judy, then Meryl, Lynn, Susan, Ellen.
I really liked what you said, Alice. It makes a lot of sense to me. I'll tell you, I love the author's writing too. But to me, the story starts with the baby and ends with the baby. And I think as women, we can all relate to when we have a baby, start to look at life differently. We analyze things differently because we have a responsibility in our life. And she is, in my opinion, she is noticing change everywhere she looks. And at the end, even her change between her and her father, her and her ex-husband, she's accepting more things of him. She recognizes her mother's plight, which, as I explained at the beginning, I was personally affected by, and it wasn't touched on as much as a shock as it really is when it happens. But I think that new mothers start to analyze everyone around them differently and looks at where they come from and looks at their own things as it relates to becoming a mother, because it changes your life so dramatically, especially with your first. So the concept, Alice, that you brought up about the evolution of all of these people and moving forward, and her being able to accept a responsibility of her father in a different way and of Jamie in a different way. I think that's the meaning of it. And I don't know if I would have used the word electricity. There has to be a word that explains the thread that goes through our life as we try to negotiate all these things. And
Connection.
yeah,
Exactly. Connection.
Connections.
Connection.
That would be a good word, because electricity didn't quite do it for me, the word electricity, but I love the story. I thought it was great.
All right, thank you. Merle.
Well, I see this as a parallel between the mother and the daughter. Both have gone through a loss. And what is this loss about? I mean, if the quote, the most important quote in the story, I thought was, what's hurting her family, Anita decides, is the unpredictability, as Lynn said, the shaky sense that everyone is finally unreliable. Anita wants to tell her mother that there's no guarantee, you can't know anything about anyone. It's the abruptness and the change. And going back to Gary's t-shirt about the adaptability, when I was 6 years old, my father invited his sister and her husband from Israel to live with us for 8 years. And they turned our home into a kosher home. They were Orthodox. My uncle would get up at 5 a.m. to lay tefillin. And I observed all this, and we were adaptable. We were fine with it. We all started keeping kosher, and I keep kosher. I mean, I always go to the kosher market. We were fine with it. But I had a neighbor who left her husband and 2 children to go live in an ashram in India, and then moved to somewhere else in the United States where she could continue living in an ashram. And a week ago, this woman knocked on my door. I hadn't seen her in 30 years. She came and we talked for an hour and a half. She continued throughout her life to study the Sanskrit, the Bible, that Bible, not our Bible. Her children eventually forgave her for leaving them. Her husband had the full responsibility. So for me, the question is, when the abrupt change hurts the family, it's not good.
Right.
I thought that what the first time I read this story, I was so sympathetic to the Orthodox husband, because while it happened at our house, we accepted it. But this time when I read this story, I thought it wasn't good. It hurt the family. The wife shouldn't have to suddenly have a husband at 53 who visits her through a sheet. I mean, it hurt the family. And I think the electricity in this story is the light, the spirituality. God said, let there be light. And when the father would turn off all the lights at the beginning, it was so empty. He didn't feel the spirituality. And then at the end, he felt full of light. And so he did have all the electricity on. But honestly, the second time reading the story, I think the abrupt change really hurt the family. That's the way I felt about it.
Yeah, yeah. Lynn.
I didn't even know where to begin with all these comments. Unbelievable. I'm coming back to my original thesis here, listening to all of you. I'm going to extend Einstein's quote because I didn't give you all of it. Because he said, if you are not changing, you are not growing. And in order to become more human, you have to grow and expand. So in this household, Merle, I understand what you're saying, but to me, and I don't know if the rest of you felt this way, I thought this Anita and her husband were real. There was an arc here. They were really immature, I thought. I thought they started as very young, and as the story progressed, Anita grew. The husband was still in the past in 7th grade. He never adapted to the present situation and took responsibility for the family. And I wrote a little note to myself because I was saying, you know, they talked about happiness and happiness in this family. And the question is, who's responsible for your happiness? Is it other people or is it yourself?
Yourself.
I mean, it's really yourself. You're responsible for your own happiness. So how does this family adjust to this abrupt change? And I think the answer is in understanding and enlightenment and growing, because those lights to me mean enlightenment. To me, the lights at the end, I think the father, in bringing his daughter to his way of life now and seeing it, he wants her to expand her. I don't think she's converting. I think she is. He's trying to get her to see what a beautiful life this is and to accept his change. I don't think he's wanting them to change, except she's having to do all of this. To me, instead of electricity, I call it bonding. I think that when you understand another person's way of life, and I think another key statement is, she says, Anita wonders what she does want, which really suggests to me her immaturity. I mean, at that stage, she has a baby and she's questioning, what does she want? I think her husband doesn't know what he wants either. So to me, the story is one of evolution and growth, and how do you discover what you want? The father at 53 has discovered what he wants. And I think, Beverly, you hit on something very important. We are at the last, what are we? We're at the last quarter of the game, and we're wondering, you know, what our life means. And he took it within his power to find happiness within himself. Is it selfish? Maybe, you know, but I'd like a reaction to that. How, I think, Merle, you brought up a very important point. You know, do changes hurt people? And should we stop changing because it's going to hurt somebody? Or do we hope that they're going to understand the way that we have chosen to live?
Good questions. Ellen, did you want to say something?
Well, the connection word before whoever said it, I totally agree with. I think that the electricity is a connection. So it makes total sense to me. I think her story, as Lynn just said about what she's gone through, she's able to accept what she respects her father, and therefore maybe it's easier for her to accept him. I can't say the wife doesn't respect him, but I agree with, I think it was Merle that said, you know, how is it for a woman who can only receive her man through a sheet? You know, the mother seemed to have suffered more than Anita, but Anita, at the end of the story, now that you've all made all these comments and made it more real or more understanding to me, I wouldn't give up on the fact that she can get back together with her husband. I mean,
I
he
agree.
was very torn. I mean, he was, I think, afraid of, well, you know, what this new baby meant to him. And he tries to sit there. Aren't they in a, this is the measure of a really good story. I, who only read it once, really want to go back and read it again, which sometimes when I don't like the story, I wouldn't want to do that. So I guess it's a great story in that. But isn't he in the playground and he's trying to talk to her and says, you know, he's having trouble expressing himself, but I have hope after all we've said about the fact of their communication and connection will prevail and hopefully, you know, make everybody's life a little bit better.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay, Susan.
Well, after listening to everybody, and I especially liked what you said, Judy, about motherhood. And I think that for Anita, her whole life was revolving around this baby. The baby was number one in her life. And for those of us who've had children, and especially when you have the first one, you're right, Judy, your life changes dramatically. And those of us, you're lucky when your husband accepts it in a mature way, which my husband did, thank heavens. It just, her whole life was this baby. I mean, all the references to him suckling at her breast, and she kept him on her breast. I mean, it seemed like wherever she was going, this baby was hanging on her breast. And that was the most important thing to her. And I also, now after listening to everybody, I do think at the end, when she talks about how her husband, how Jamie was squeezing her hand when she was giving birth to the baby, and she said, I can't do it. And he said, yes, you can. And then the next thing she knew, she had the baby. And then she kind of talks about her father putting up his hand, and she puts her hand up, but they never really touch. But she feels the pressure as if her father, just as if he were squeezing her hand, even though he wasn't. And her connection to these two men, it came second after the baby, but I don't think we could give up hope that she and Jamie wouldn't get back together again. I think it hinted at that at the end, where
I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
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 I think, you know, we're left hanging.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's the possibility.
Yeah.
That he will grow up and be able to accept the responsibility of fatherhood.
Yeah. Okay, Terry.
Well, I just wanted to talk about the reference to the Zapruder film, because I looked up that reference because I wasn't familiar with what that was talking about. Evidently,
JFK.
Yeah. Evidently, this man, whose name was Zapruder, I guess he had a camcorder and he recorded, you know, the whole assassination, and people poured over the footage. And she compares herself to an assassination buff examining that film. No matter how many times she rewinds it frame by frame, she can't see the smoking gun, the face at the warehouse window. All she sees is that suddenly everyone in the car starts moving very strangely. And I think that's her kind of trying to piece together, why didn't she see the signs when it was happening? The fact that when he came to the hospital, when he was there with the baby, and she thought he was crying out of happiness. And she couldn't even hear what he was saying to her, that he had another woman and he was leaving, because she was so much in denial about that even being a possibility. And I think a lot of what she's talking about is just her sense of being uprooted. How did this happen? Why didn't she see the signs? And her sister is saying, oh, of course, you should have seen it. She said, only her mother understands. And so in that way, she's connecting to her mother because her mother's also experiencing, as others have said, a sense of loss. So that part I thought was very interesting. And I like the scenario that people have brought up that she and Jamie will get back together again, because I hadn't really thought about it, but I agree. I think the signs are there.
All right, I have Merle, Alice, and then Elaine. Merle, go ahead.
After the baby was born, there was going to be a visit with the grandparents. And originally they were going to go to Anita, but then Anita went to them with the baby Birdie. And it was because her mother had said that dad had changed in some way and she didn't exactly know what had happened. And she wondered, this was the exact quote, had he too fallen in love with somebody else? And she kind of hit it on, I mean, she hit the nail on the head. He had fallen in love with something else.
Yes.
And when you talk about his priorities now, did the new religion come before his wife and before everything else? I think that's what happens. Where are you going to love the stepmother as well as you loved your mother? Yeah, he has fallen in love with something else. So I still think it hurt the family more than it helped, but they might adapt. And, you know, as like Gary's t-shirt said, if they're adaptable, their family will survive. But really, I mean, watching what happened with my neighbor who moved to the ashram in India and then to an ashram in the United States, it disrupts the family so much. And I just think it's so hard on everyone.
Agreed. Alice, and then Elaine, and then Lynn.
Yeah, it's so funny, Terry. I was just gonna focus in on that Zapruder movie, but kind of to add to what you said, well, kind of to support what you said, is that at the end of that paragraph, Anita says all she sees is that suddenly everyone in the car starts moving very strangely. And then the next paragraph is Anita's mother believes her. Overnight, her husband turned into a born again Hasid. I'm just going to repeat. I don't think either of these were like overnight. It's just that that's all you see, but there's more brewing under it.
Agreed. Okay, Elaine.
All right. I think all of us have had friends who have gotten divorced. And the wife's, oh, I never saw it coming. Oh, I never saw this. Oh, I never saw that. I think that we are making Jamie to be the bad, horrible husband. And I think they're both to blame, Anita and Jamie. And also, I think at a certain, as I said before, at a certain age, you're looking for something, and both of the men are afraid. The father's afraid of dying and not maybe knowing God, and Jamie is afraid of being a father, which if we really look, I mean, it's not a noble thing to walk away, but it's an understandable thing. And whatever was going on in people's marriages, you know, the saying goes, you don't know what happens behind closed doors.
That's right.
You don't know what happened with Jamie and Anita. And maybe he was just so scared. If she had opened up her eyes, maybe things would be different. Maybe the father wouldn't seek orthodoxy. Maybe he would just seek some enlightenment, be conservative, or go to temple on Friday nights and be reformed. But he definitely was looking for a connection. The men are definitely looking for a connection. And the women are flopping around, not connecting really with anything. So I think that we have been more sympathetic towards the women, but we need to look at the men as maybe more with some understanding.
All good points. Lynn.
Let me gather my thoughts here. I think, of course I think, Jamie has hit, I want to go back to his story because I think his story is really important. I don't think he's not wanting to take responsibility. I'm changing my mind here for the baby. I think he is, and I think this is really typical of new fathers. He's questioning his ability to father, to be a parent, and the quality of life that he's going to give this kid. And he doesn't want his son to hate him because he couldn't give him anything exciting to admire in his, which we look at and we say, what is this? What's a legacy? I mean, the legacy that you give your kids hopefully is not a material legacy. I'm not sure about the North Shore and raising your kids on the North Shore, but a legacy that you give your kids are the experiences and the love and the attachments and the connections that you make. And I think that when she goes to this event in the temple, in the synagogue, she sees connections among all these people. She thinks it's a beautiful legacy to leave her kids. And I believe she's going to communicate that to her husband, because she makes some bad assumptions. He's not going to want to hear about the Cheerios. Well, of course he's going to want to hear about the Cheerios. He's going to want to hear about the life. And then when they get together, he asks exactly those questions about the kid. He wants to know about this child. And so I think she makes a wrong assumption there. But I think after that experience in the temple, where she sees these people lavishing affection upon this child, that she sees what legacy her father's going to leave her by joining this temple. I mean, it's an extreme example. I think this is that the author uses this Hasidism as a anchor to the story. It's not I don't think it's the prime reason for all the action that happens, but we do come back to it at the end of the story. And it is, I think at the end, those paragraphs where she says, where they see this connection, that connection is going to last, and that she's going to extend that into her own family and establish more connections. So I think this idea of legacy and what you leave your kids, what do you leave behind when all is said and done? It's not the material. It's not the car. It's not the, I'm laughing because our daughter had an argument about the Cavaricci jeans we didn't buy her when she was in junior high. So that's not a legacy.
No, it's not.
Yes.
Okay, all good points. Terry, Izzy, then Judy.
Well, I was thinking about the fact that last Thursday, the rabbi who is the head of Chabad in Glencoe arrived at my door with his 2-year-old daughter and brought me the most gorgeous challah that his wife Rivka had baked. And he explained that on Pesach, when someone came to our door and laid to fill in with my husband, that was just his friend. I didn't know who that person had been, but he enlisted his friends to go around. They go around and look for the houses with a mezuzah, and they, depending upon the holiday, they bring what they bring. But he said the reason why he didn't come on Pesach is because his wife Rivka had just given birth to their 4th child. And so here's this woman who's now had 4 children, but she likes to bake challah. I have no idea how many she bakes, but clearly he never knew us before. And there he was at my door with this magnificent challah. And what he talked about was the beauty of what they want to impart, that it's not about labels. It's not about the kind of Jew you are. It's just about bringing joy. And the Pinta Layid is what he described, that this is what they want everyone to experience. And I'm thinking about that as I'm picturing her at that wedding, and just the feeling that she must have started to feel just being surrounded by all of that, that she was accepted. I mean, they had no idea who she was and whether she was religious or anything, and it didn't matter to them. And so I think that as people have talked about that aspect, I think that really is an important part of the story. And I had another thought that was the first time I raised my hand that has completely escaped me. It may come back, but it really, I think that the whole idea of the legacy and what they want to bring, I think you're right, Lynn, about Jamie. And I think that he really just felt he couldn't be the Milt Perlman. He felt like he was going to be a disappointment to this child. And I think that that really is why he pulled away. And she was so, you see different examples of how immature she was throughout her life. When she was a child and she was with her parents, she felt inconspicuous, she felt conspicuous, but actually she said she was really invisible. And she makes comments like she doesn't feel like her feet, when she goes to put her feet on the ground, she doesn't know if she feels the ground beneath them. There's something so fragile about her identity. And I think maybe at some point, by the time the story ends, she starts to have this feeling of, whether it's her father bringing this connection or whatever it is, and her sister giving her the eyeshadow, because that's going to somehow change her life.
That was a really good visual. Yeah.
And
That's her legacy.
And she said she was touched by the gift, which I thought was very interesting. So I mean, there's a lot going on within Anita, which is very interesting.
Yes. Right. I have Izzy, Judy, then Merle. Izzy.
And I was reading down here that the thought of Jamie getting back with her, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine that happening. Because down here she says Anita thinks not much. For one thing, the chronology is wrong. Jamie fell in love with Bertie before Bertie was born. For another thing, Bertie isn't Jamie and Jamie isn't his father's. I think it was just an excuse. I just can't see. I think he was selfish and immature, Jamie, and I don't think he's gonna. It took a long time for him to finally see the baby, and she's kind of sarcastic. She said, "Look how he holds his baby up. That's my boy." And then she says to him, "He's been doing that for 4 months," which kind of puts him down and reminds him that he hasn't seen the baby in 4 months. And I just, I think Anita is very mixed up, and I still say the same thing. To me, it was propaganda for orthodoxy that isn't just wonderful. But meanwhile, they're eating dinner and he has to bless every single vegetable, every single everything they can't eat. And then he's jumping up every 2 minutes, praising this, praising that, sitting. I don't know. I thought it was like a parable in some ways.
I have something to read, but first, Judy and then Meryl.
I will tell you that based on Lynn's comment, I agree. The longer we talk, the more we change our minds about what we're reading. Because I have to tell you, both of these men, Jamie and the father, split when they had a problem. Now, their split may have been for a good reason for them, but the women had to adapt to what they did. Her mother had to adapt to the father's orthodoxy. Anita had to adapt to Jamie's affair and the other. I don't think they're going to get back together. Or I'll tell you what, I would tell her if she called me, I would say, get back together with him. But on the other hand, I think it's about women having to adapt both to her child and to the other members of her family. She's learning how to adapt because she has, as you said, before when she was young, she didn't have her own sense of self. Now she has to because she has a child. And that in and of itself creates a new you. And so I think it's about women having to adapt. Now I think it's about women having to adapt to other people in their lives as they change.
Agreed. And Meryl, then Joyce.
Okay, Anita's sister Lynn said she believes that Jamie left because he was jealous of the mother-child bond. So that lasts throughout life. And I think that Jamie could come back if he gets over the jealousy of the mother-child bond and embraces the child as he's part of the bond too. The thing about Anita and her father, though, I think things were going well toward the end because she said, what's so strange about a man wanting to sing and dance his way into heaven? So I thought that relationship did seem more optimistic at the end. And there are so many people in the family, we never really got the mother's full point of view. But I think that things will go okay with Anita and her father at the end.
Okay, Joyce.
I think Anita's going to have an easier time than the mother. It seems like the mother is isolated. It doesn't appear that she has any support in the rest of the community helping her with the conversion to kashrut or anything else. And it's a very big change. And she seems more resentful than adaptive.
So I found this one paragraph that I want to read to you. And it's from encyclopedia.com of arts and news, but they say, for example, in the deftly crafted, this is about Francine Prose. In the deftly crafted short story, Electricity, first came out in 1988, Prose weaves an extraordinary story of a miraculous occurrence throughout an ordinary story of a divorced young woman's return with her young child to her parents' home in Brooklyn. In this story, marked by very real difficulties for American women of maintaining marriages, raising children, and defining their role out of gender-determined guidelines in the rapidly changing patterns of the end of the 20th century, Prose introduces a miracle that changes her protagonist's version of herself and of her place in the world. The protagonist, Anita, returns home, defeated, embarrassed by her husband's desertion, to find that her father, who in childhood was always a non-observant Jew, becomes a Hasid, and he believes in all these miraculous powers of the rabbi. To Anita's bewilderment and unnerved surprise, her father, who in the midst of her own marital upheavals, her sister's feminism, her mother's outraged objections, attends a Hasidic shul, will not travel on Shabbat, follows rigid Jewish law and all its specificity, and dances Hasidic dances of celebration in their basement. An attempt to explain his conversion, father tells the story of his rescue from the thugs on the subway and the blinking light, a universal message of help. So I think that's an interesting take on this, and full transparency. I was like, oh no, we've read this story before. What are we going to have to talk about? And look at this, ladies, you had so much to talk about. I have one more thing for you. June 7th is our next book group, but I'm going to be out of town. My sister and I are going to New York. We're going to see Goodnight Oscar. That's her. She really wants to go see that with Sean Hayes. We'll go see something else, maybe stand in line. So I propose that we meet again June 21st, which is the 3rd. And I will send out to everyone. And I had it open this whole time. Our next story is Say It Isn't So, Mr. Yiddish. And that'll get us to part 3 of the new Diaspora. And we will probably take a break for July and August. I'll send this all out in an email. We'll talk about it. There'll be a flyer. If you ever need anything, you can come see me. Would people be interested in meeting in person on June 17th? Just for our last time.
I mean, the 21st.
21st.
Oh, you know what? The 21st I can't do, but the 17th.
Yeah, I can't either.
No, the 21st. I meant the 21st.
Okay, I can't do it.
No, I can't be there the
Do it.
20th.
I can't do that date, so.
Okay.
I can't
All
do
right.
the-
We'll keep it on the 21st. I'll Zoom it. I'll record it. if you're, I think I'm trying to record it every time. So if you want a recording, just let me know. And thank you, everyone. What great insight. I liked it even more the second time.
Great.
Now I like, now I like the
Have a great
story.
day.
Now I like the story.
Bye-bye.
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 Thank you, Vanessa.
My pleasure.
Thank you.